Would the U.S. really abandon Israel at the United Nations? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tells Fox what he thinks. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. President Obama's reaction to Israel's re-election of Benjamin Netanyahu as prime minister might be, if you can't beat him, leave him. There is speculation the U.S. might try to pressure Israel into a peace deal with the Palestinians by reevaluating its longtime support for the Jewish state at the United Nations. At the same time, Congress is pressuring the administration over progress on a nuclear deal with Iran that Israel has warned could lead to war. We have Fox team coverage tonight. James Rosen here in the Bureau with Democratic outrage to the details of the latest rumored framework between Iran, the U.S., and its allies. But we begin with correspondent Kevin Corke and a U.S.-Israel relationship that continues to fluctuate between bad and worse, and a phone call that some say was a long time coming. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening to you, Brett. You're right. Tonight, the president did finally reach out to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, congratulating his party on gaining a plurality in the Israeli Knesset. He also talked about his commitment to maintaining a push for a two-state solution between Palestinians and Israelis. But that call tonight is being overshadowed by what may be a huge historic shift in U.S.-Israeli relations.
I think that anyone who moves to establish a Palestinian state and evacuate territory is just giving territory away to radical Islamist attacks against Israel.
The White House is still fuming over pre-election comments by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in which he seemed to reject a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Comments, the White House said, undermine 20 years of diplomatic effort and acknowledge could now set up a showdown of longtime allies in the United Nations Security Council.
After the comments of the Israeli Prime Minister, it's pretty clear that Israel is no longer committed to that outcome.
Some have speculated the remarks were part of Israeli campaign rhetoric, noting the stance seemed in sharp contrast to this in 2009.
In my peace vision, there are living in this piece of land two free nations, one next to the other, with mutual respect.
But in an interview with Fox News' Megyn Kelly, the Prime Minister insisted nothing's changed. He's always been willing to work with President Obama on sustainable peace in the region.
He's now reportedly saying that he sees no path to a peace agreement and is threatening to abandon Israel at the United Nations, which would reverse decades of history. What would that mean for Israel?
Well, I hope that's not true, and I think President Obama has said time and time again, as I've said, that the only path to a peace agreement is an agreement, a negotiated agreement. You can't impose it. You can't force the people of Israel, who've just elected me by a wide margin to bring them peace and security, to secure the state of Israel, to accept terms that would endanger the very survival of the state of Israel. I don't think that's the direction of American policy. I hope it's not.
But even that's in question. Administration officials are said to be weighing support for a UN Security Council resolution calling for the establishment of a sovereign Palestine and a return to the pre-1967 borders that divide Israel from the West Bank and Gaza.
Because of his pretty clear indication that he's prepared to withdraw from very serious commitments that Israel had previously made to a two-state solution, that does and has prompted us to reevaluate our approach to this matter.
Now, as you might well imagine, the two men talked about a number of issues in that conversation tonight, among them Iran. The president saying to the prime minister that he remains committed to reaching a comprehensive deal, Brett, that will keep the Iranian regime from gaining a nuclear weapon.
Kevin Corke live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. You can see more of Megyn Kelly's interview with Prime Minister Netanyahu tonight on the Kelly File at 9 Eastern. Democrats turned on the president today over Iran. The not-so-friendly fire comes amid speculation that a nuclear deal with the Islamic Republic may be imminent, a deal that many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are now openly saying could do more harm than good. Here's Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen.
During a break in the Iran nuclear talks, Secretary of State Kerry told reporters he is pushing tough issues and making progress, while Iran's foreign minister stressed that some issues remain unresolved.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Back in Washington, the White House denied published reports that with a March 31st deadline for a political agreement looming, the U.S. and its partners in the nuclear talks have begun marking up the proposed final terms.
I can tell you pretty definitively that there is no draft document that's being circulated.
Of course there are many pieces of paper. There's a difference between that and a draft agreement.
On Capitol Hill, however, Democrats on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, hearing testimony from the State Department's number 2 official, proved no less suspicious of the deal taking shape than their GOP colleagues, particularly over the administration's recent admission that the non-binding deal will only last 10 years or so.
I fear that you have misled this committee in telling us that once Iran has the rights of a non-nuclear state, subject to the additional protocol, that you'll be able to stop sneak out. Because you've said first that, well, they can't develop a nuclear weapon because that would be illegal. That's a preposterous argument.
One of the things that's really annoying to all of us is that we are sitting and negotiating with Iran over its nuclear program at a time when Iran continues to be a bad actor all around the world.
The press comes to us and they look like, well, we don't know what's going on with the administration.
Don't always believe what you read.
Yeah, I know. I don't believe what I listen to when people come in front of me either.
For his part, Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken stressed that any deal, if finalized, would contain restrictions on Iran's nuclear ambitions that would go beyond the sunset date.
Some constraints would be removed after a significant period of time. Others would remain in effect even longer, and some would last indefinitely, including a stringent and intrusive monitoring and inspections regime.
And to dispel the notion that the negotiations themselves have helped Iran's economy rebound, a top Treasury Department official testified that Iran's currency, the rial, has lost 12% of its value since the talks formally opened 14 months ago. Brett.
James, thank you. ISIS terrorists are claiming responsibility for yesterday's massacre at a museum in Tunisia. 23 people were killed, mostly tourists. Tunisia says it has arrested 9 people so far, 5 directly connected to the operation and 4 others based outside the capital city of Tunis. The ISIS statement calls the attack a blessed invasion of one of the dens of infidels and vice in Muslim Tunisia. Indications tonight that what used to be the dormant Cold War between the U.S. and Russia may be alive and well and heating up. Russian President Vladimir Putin is upping the ante militarily, and now the U.S. is responding. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin has more from the Pentagon tonight.
With Russian aggression in Ukraine continuing, the White House announced it will begin training 750 Ukraine troops after a phone call last night between Vice President Joe Biden and Ukraine's president. This as Russians celebrated the one-year anniversary of their annexation of Crimea.
In Russia, we always thought that Russians and Ukrainians were one nation. I think so now, too.
Putin recently ordered widespread Russian military drills involving 40,000 servicemen, 41 warships, and 15 submarines. A senior NATO military officer says Russia has carried out a dozen SNAP exercises in the past 2 years, including the one that ended in the invasion of Crimea. A shift not seen since the Cold War. The U.S. says Russia has been jamming the airspace over eastern Ukraine while continuing live-fire drills on Ukraine's border. NATO, meanwhile, intercepted 11 Russian warplanes and transport aircraft that had turned off their transponders en route to Kaliningrad, the tiny Russian enclave in the Baltics, where the Kremlin announced this week that it plans to deploy state-of-the-art missiles known as Iskander missiles along the border with Poland and Lithuania. The U.S. Army, meantime, is flexing its muscles as the U.S. Army's European Command announced it was sending dozens of Stryker combat vehicles and 600 troops on an 1,100-mile convoy through 6 countries in the Baltics starting March 21st.
This road march is significant because it demonstrates to the Russians that the American military can maneuver across their front.
750 U.S. military vehicles, including tanks and artillery, began arriving last week in Riga, Latvia.
Now we're going to lean forward and demonstrate to Russia and to Putin that we are not broken in our efforts to stand together through this type of aggression.
Russia announced it will deploy long-range nuclear-capable strategic bombers to Crimea, but so far they have not done so. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Up next, you might be surprised how Hillary Clinton is doing in the polls amid her email and donor scandals. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 27 in Charlottesville, where there is outrage over this image of a University of Virginia student during his arrest outside a bar early Wednesday. The governor is now calling for an investigation into the treatment of third-year student Martise Johnson. The state alcohol beverage control department says Johnson sustained injuries in the course of the arrest being made. WDBD in Jackson, Mississippi, as the NAACP asked the Justice Department to look into the hanging death of an African-American man. The body of 54-year-old Otis Bird was found this morning hanging from a tree. He had been missing for 10 days. And this is a live look at Fox 11, our affiliate out in Los Angeles. The big story there tonight, a daredevil motorcyclist engaged police in an hour-long high-speed pursuit. Take a look at this. He taunted officers by standing up on his seat, taking a selfie. He eventually pulled into a gas station and surrendered. That's tonight's live look. Outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.